Welcome to Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is about drugs and helping people who want to be free from them actually achieve this. And so, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This chapter, we talk a lot about the different types of drugs and their effect on society, and then kind of the latter half, we talk about how they are being treated, how as a social worker you could intervene in these situations. So we're going to define drugs and substance abuse here at the start. So a drug is any substance that chemically alters. I think the important word here is chemically. I remember meeting people who were talking about how they had chemical addiction, and I remember being thrown off by that. But chemical is just different from, say, gambling or pornography or something like that. It's a chemical. It's outside the body. It's a substance of some sort, and not just what I think of when I think of chemical, like a laboratory or like in chemistry class, but it's actually something that's grown or something that's manufactured. So it alters the function or the structure of the body. Usually I think about the functioning of the body. So it's causing people to feel different feelings. They're more relaxed, or they're more energetic, or their pain is gone, or they're feeling really excited. Or the structure of the body. And when I think about this, I think about like steroids. Substance abuse disorder it's a little bit cultural. It's a little bit like what some person may think of as excessive or have a disorder. Someone else may say, no, that's not a disorder. That's just kind of what we do here. So realize there's a little bit of ambiguity here. The regular or excessive use of a substance, right? So it's excessive, it's too much, or it's regular use as defined by a group, which means that we may have a different definition of alcoholism than maybe the Russians do. The consequences endanger the relationship with other people, are detrimental to the user's health, or are jeopardize society itself. Okay, so we have a lot of different things. I feel like when people are in the industry, when they're working with people, they can kind of like develop, like have a sixth sense. This person has lost control. This person has not. This person has a disorder or has the disease. This person has not. Usually, when you're working with people with substance abuse disorders, they themselves recognize that they have a problem. If they don't recognize that they have a disorder, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to help that person, even if it's very obvious to everybody else in the environment that the person has an issue, right? Usually people are willing to change when they've come to that place where they themselves realize that they're having an issue. Usually it's detrimental to their own health, but oftentimes it's also having an effect on the people they care about most, usually their family, people like that. All right, a brief history of our drug-taking society. Our author said something really interesting in that he said that as Americans, we believe there is a pill for everything. And that's interesting because I've heard that some version of that before, this idea that we think that we should be feeling good all the time. And if we're not feeling good, something's wrong with us and we should do something. You know, most people, when we do something, we're eating, or we're picking up our phone, or we're doing something, and ultimately all of those things have a similar effect in the sense that they change our brain chemistry. You know, when we eat carbs, it releases brain chemicals, or if somebody is smoking marijuana, it's releasing brain chemicals. And so perhaps that is why we have a high addiction level, because we're sort of expecting to feel good and we're doing something. Some things are much more socially acceptable. Obviously, caffeine and social media is much more acceptable than heroin or LSD. But it sort of comes from the same place. So, narcotics addiction was a serious problem in the 1860s. All the way up to the first decade of the 20th century, it was not necessarily considered a problem among most people. Our first drug law was against the smoking of opium. That's because the Chinese were using it, but narcotics, opium was a major problem among a lot of different groups. It's just that it wasn't really considered that much of an issue. But they say that even, during the time of the Civil War, we probably had way more addiction to opium than we do today, and we consider ourselves in the midst of an opioid crisis, where we're losing, close to the same number of people due to opium today than we are due to suicide. So, all right, moving on. Tobacco is a popular substance for chewing, and after 1870, used for smoking. Marijuana in the 1960s and 70s became increasingly popular, as did the fines and the jail time for using marijuana. Alcohol use has continued unabated ever since the Pilgrims landed. Interesting, in our book it talks about how the Pilgrims took more beer than they did water. That is because that water was much more dangerous to drink than alcohol, in the sense that alcohol was much less likely to make you sick because the fermentation process killed a lot of the bugs in it that water would have had there. So, all right. Comprehend sociological theories for substance abuse. Okay, so why do people use, or I should say abuse drugs? That's the real question here. Why do people abuse drugs? Why do people lose control of their ability to take a substance that maybe makes them feel a different way, but then despite all their best efforts and all our best efforts, continue to use even when it is harmful? Even when the person understands that it's harmful, somehow it hijacks the brain's reward centers and takes over. And despite the fact that the person understands that they're risking and they're throwing away so much good stuff, what's going on in the brain? Well, according to sociology, it's not about the individual person's brain. It's about going on in society. So anime, if I'm saying that right, it's just about the fact that when society changes so fast, people don't know what the rules are for society. Like, is it okay to express my mind on social media? What if I'm making a comment on a news story? It seems as though in our society today, we feel comfortable saying anything, whereas in the past, that would have been considered not appropriate. And so maybe in the midst of all this change, the former president is calling the election rigged, and so things are changing so fast that people are turning to substances in the midst of that because they don't know what the rules are, or they're looking for a relief from this. So the labeling theory says that if we label someone as a stoner, as a dropout, then they're going to use because we've labeled them, and then they've accept that label, and they're fulfilling that label. Differential association. If you're part of a group that says, hey, this is what we do, this is how we distinguish ourselves from other people, part of that is using drugs. But no single theory seems to be able to explain things perfectly, and so in some ways it's still a mystery. We're going to summarize the common facts about and the effects of commonly used substances. I am not going to be talking about every substance here. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them aren't even used that much anymore. But let's start with a very commonly used drug, and that is alcohol. Alcohol is responsible for more aggression than any other drug that I know of. I think cigarettes kill more people, but alcohol is certainly one of the most commonly abused. I think probably the most commonly abused. So while we might focus on scary drugs, sort of like the heroines and the cracks and the things that we're much less familiar with, I mean the average person anyway, is much less familiar with them. Alcohol, which we're much more familiar with, is actually responsible for a lot more deaths and a lot more abuse, destroying a lot more people's lives than the quote-unquote scary ones. So let's talk about who drinks. Men drink more than women. Younger people drink more than older people. Reasons for drinking: it's social. It lowers inhibition. People are feeling more willing to communicate and more willing to be around other people than when they are not drinking. Health problems that are caused by alcohol are related to the fact that we drink it, so it's going to affect the areas where the alcohol hits first. The mouth, the stomach, the liver, right? Those are the areas where the alcohol is processed. And that same theme of looking where the drug comes in and that's where the problems are going to show up, that is usually true. So if a drug is smoked, well, then it's going to have issues with the mouth and the throat and the lungs, right? If that is injected, you're going to have issues with the veins, the arteries, things like that. So drinking and driving is very, very scary, and as a society, we have reacted by making it harder for people to drink and drive, by having stricter laws and cracking down on that much more than we did 20 and 30 years ago. Crime and alcohol. Alcohol is oftentimes a part of many fights, domestic abuse, other crimes, very common for alcohol to be involved. Alcohol abuse impacts the family and the workplace a lot. Many people who grow up with alcoholic parents, that has a lasting impact on them even if they themselves never drink. Alcoholism gene theory says that we inherit alcoholism from our parents, and that people with the gene for alcoholism are much more likely to be alcoholics than those without it. Okay. Many people avoid treatment. That is a very common thing, so don't be surprised when people try to avoid it, even if there are very obvious problems related to it. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, when mothers who drink, they increase the likelihood that the fetus is going to develop problems while developing. By the way, this is much less common than it used to be in the past, as we understand that drinking impacts the fetus. That was not always the case in the past. Other depressants, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, PCP, and date rape drugs, more illegal. I think all of these are illegal. Well, they're all illegal to use as a street level. Some of these are prescribed, or at least were prescribed, but all of them have the effect of creating decreasing stress on the immune system. They're depressants, and so it's going to create relaxation and cause people to feel more relaxed. Sometimes feelings of taking away pain. Date rape drugs, when they're used to rape people, oftentimes cause people to feel very disoriented and pass out rather quickly. The effects of alcohol on the blood. In the beginning, the first few drinks, when the alcohol level is at very low levels, it causes people to feel really good, and then slowly begins to decrease coordination. And then as this increases, people become unconscious and then potentially die due to alcohol poisoning. Stimulants, the opposite effect of depressants in some ways, because while depressants, decrease central nervous system activity, stimulants increase central nervous system activity. Oftentimes, dilating the blood vessels and causing more energy. People feel, more excited and want to be more active. This is everything from your everyday mild coffee all the way through amphetamines, which is going to include methamphetamines, but also is going to include other forms of it, some of which you can find in your local pharmacy: crack cocaine, amyl nitrates, butyl nitrates. Found, at least what I'm familiar with, is like NO, or nitrous oxide. People will fill up balloons at parties and then inhale that. It comes from an oil, and I think it was originally used in operating rooms, but they stopped using it because there's other stuff that's fewer side effects, and other narcotics. Hallucinogens are drugs that cause people to perceive things that are not there or that other people don't see. And I associate them with like the 60s. Peyote is, I think, a cactus or something out west. I associate it also with Native Americans. LSD, again, like the 1960s, but it has come back into style in a sense, medicinally, kind of like marijuana has. There's a lot of research being done on LSD and psilocybin and ecstasy as well as a therapeutic way of helping people specifically with PTSD. So they're like at these elite universities. They're working with people who suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder related to their time maybe in service and war, and they're finding out amazing results. And despite the fact that I was really scared away from hallucinogens by, DARE and things like that, they're finding that if they're able to control the substance and like the purity, and they're able to control the environment, they don't have the side effects that I assume that they would. So stay tuned for more on that. But I anticipate probably the next 10 years it will be legal in at least a therapeutic medicinal way, at a therapist office near you. So I believe tobacco is still the #1 killer in America in terms of drugs. I think we lose 1,300 people per day due to tobacco. Now, maybe that's going to switch because the number of people using tobacco has gone down significantly. I think it's halved or more than halved in the last 70 years. So, but there's new and different cigarettes like e-cigarettes and vaping, which is sort of I don't know, the fact that it's called E just sort of is funny, like the branding around that. And even Marlboro cigarettes, which was, losing customers because many less young people smoke today than in the past. They bought an e-cigarette company and are kind of coming at it from that angle. But I think initially people thought that e-cigarettes were a lot safer because, hey, there's no actual combustion, and there is nicotine, but perhaps it's not as bad. But the research kind of shows that it is bad. I don't know if it's as bad. That's probably going to take some more time to figure out, but certainly not a healthy alternative to cigarette smoking. Let's talk about marijuana. Marijuana, I've seen a big change in the way that society thinks about marijuana in the last 40 years. It went from being something very scary, something that people use who are, at risk of dropping out of society. It's associated with hippie culture or criminality. And now it is associated with being medicinal, and people use it to help them sleep. There still are significant side effects to it. That hasn't really changed. You can have, long-term, especially in your lungs, where you can develop problems there, memory, driving ability, reaction time, things like that. But it is now legal recreationally in the state of Missouri and the state of Illinois for people to use. And despite the fact that I thought you'd see a lot more of it on the streets, you just don't really see it there. So anyway, what else? All right, let's talk about steroids. Anabolic steroids, these are drugs that are used to enhance people's ability to build muscles, and the synthetic form mimics a male hormone, testosterone, and it is, people use it who are typically trying to build muscle mass because it enhances people's ability to build muscle quickly and enlarge the muscles that they already have. It is banned in sporting competitions. That doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. And maybe there are new, different steroids that the tests that we have don't actually measure. And the bad side effects, even though I had a student last year told me that they were really not that bad of a side effects. Well, from what I understand, they cause all kinds of problems, like men to grow breasts and to have sexual problems, and women to begin to grow body hair, and men lose their hair on top of their heads, and other issues if
if the person using is still developing, meaning they're in the midst of, like they're early teens and they're still growing physically, it can change the way that they're growing. It can stunt their growth. So, all right, let's talk about rehabilitation programs for substance use disorders. All right, there are alcohol treatment programs. Some of them are inpatient. We have one of those in Anna that is called, I don't know what it's called at the moment, but it is next to the VA, next to Choate and between Choate and the VA nursing home that is there. It used to be that we recommended that families have conversations with their loved ones where they said, hey, this is a confrontation. You have a problem. You need to do this, or we are out of here. They no longer recommend that anymore. What they recommend now is motivational treatment, which is about like, hey, like, is this what you want your life to look like? What is important to you? How is alcohol holding you back from what you actually want to do with your life? So there's inpatient, I mentioned that, residential programs. There's also outpatient. This is places like community mental health centers oftentimes have alcohol and drug treatment programs, and people come in for a few hours, do a class, and then they leave. So the difference between inpatient and outpatient is that you sleep at an inpatient facility and you don't at an outpatient. So self-help programs are very popular, and they're cheap, and they've been around forever, and they're effective. There's so much to love about self-help programs. That doesn't mean that they are for everybody. Not everybody likes, the group environment. Doesn't work for everybody. But in terms of a cost and resource basis, Alcoholics Anonymous just has an incredible amount of just history of success with people. That doesn't make it easy. You have to open up and you have to share and you have to work the program, as they say. But if you are willing to do so, there's a lot of opportunity for growth and success. Halfway houses are kind of halfway in between, like halfway between prison and private housing, halfway between inpatient and living on your own. So a lot of times there's a minimal amount of supervision, but there is some structure to kind of easing people away from a very controlled. Inpatient is lots of rules, lots of control, lots of people telling you what to do and when to wake up and things like that. And then you're on your own and it's like, whoa, this is like baptism by fire. And so sometimes the halfway house is kind of a gentle easing into independence. Treatments using drugs. I hear more about this today than I did in the past. Medication-assisted treatment. The idea of medication-assisted treatment is to reduce the cravings for alcohol, or to make the person, when they drink alcohol, to become very sick. Like for instance, like if you had an issue with donuts, let's say, and you took this medication, and every time you smelled a donut, you wanted to throw up. And if you ate a donut, you would be sick for hours. That might help you with your donut problem, right? And so that's, one of the ideas on the way medication-assisted treatment works. Again, there's no guarantee. The person has to take it, and it is possible to drink through it. But a lot of times people find that it is helpful. It's one tool. All right, understanding and treating codependency. Codependency is somewhat controversial, so be aware of that if you talk about it with people. Not everyone buys into it. But the idea is that there are people who need somebody who's addicted. So let's say it's a husband and wife, and the wife has the drinking problem. It could be that the husband needs her to be an alcoholic in order for him to feel like he has a purpose in life, to make him feel like he's needed, and he doesn't even know who he is outside of the presence of an addict, right? So people who are so affected by their loved one's substance abuse that they lose their own identity. they may need treatment to terminate their caregiving and enabling behaviors, right? So the enabling is kind of like, yeah, like, so it's kind of putting the fault for the drinking on the husband, because the husband is allowing the wife to drink by taking care of her, by taking up the things and doing the things that she should be doing. Like, she wakes up, and she's, still intoxicated from the night before, and so the husband calls into work for her. That would be an example of an enabling behavior. The idea is that if you're going to treat the person with the addiction, but they're living with somebody who's codependent, you're going to have to treat both of them if you want long-term success. And that is oftentimes the issue. People can, they can stay sober for a few weeks, even a few months, but if you want long-term sobriety, then the underlying issues oftentimes have to be dealt with. Much harder. All right, specify suggestions for curbing substance abuse in the future. All right, last slide here. What can we do to try to reduce or further reduce the amount of drug abuse in the future, right? So education programs. Unfortunately, DARE came out, I don't know, like 15, 20 years ago and said that their program really is not effective. And so that doesn't mean that no education programs are effective. For instance, today's young people are much less likely to have alcohol problems than my generation did. There's a lot less binge drinking, there's a lot less cigarette smoking than there was, again, in the times past. So we're doing something right, and I think some of it has to do with the fact that we're educating people more about the drugs. Either that, or we're all just addicted to cell phones, and so cell phones have taken the place of substance abuse. This is also possible. But what else? We can prevent illegal drugs from coming into the country. So if you think about this as a supply and demand problem, we can reduce the demand by doing education. So we don't want the drugs as much. Or we can reduce the supply by keeping drugs outside of the country. And so many drugs that are popular, like marijuana and cocaine and ecstasy, these are actually, most of them are manufactured outside of the United States and brought into the United States through, oftentimes very organized gangs. So we could do more to prevent those by making it an international problem and saying, to the producers around the world, saying, hey, you have to, crack down on the drug manufacturers in your country. Employee drug testing programs. Again, a little bit controversial because some people feel like this is a violation of your right to privacy. And so if your employer is, drug testing you, then they are violating your rights just to be free as a human. The person would say, listen, I'm doing the job safely, I'm doing the job well, you don't need to, give me a P test. But it's another way of discouraging people from using stricter laws and enforcement, right? We know that putting more people in jail doesn't tend to reduce drug use, but you can have stricter laws on, like athletes, which we've done to some degree in the last 20 years, and actually enforcing, laws across a spectrum, so that nobody gets to not have the same, rule book thrown at them. Decriminalizing of drugs, a little bit opposite of stricter laws, and this is the idea that it is the breaking of the law that is attractive to people, and that if you decriminalize drug use, then people will try drugs possibly, or and then realize that they're just not for them. And if it's decriminalized, then it allows it takes away, the gang or the black market selling distribution of the drugs, and so it becomes kind of like out into the open. And then if people have addiction problems, they're more likely to get treatment because they're not doing something illegal. So last but not least, harm reduction programs, and this would include things like needle exchanges and trying to find a way of helping people who are using to not hurt themselves as much. So for instance, if you're using heroin, heroin itself is going to be harmful to their bodies, but at least you can have clean needles so that you're not also getting HIV or some other blood-borne pathogen in the midst of using, trying to reduce the harm. There is a hotline number called Never Use Alone, and there if you're alone and you're using a drug like heroin, which has a potentially deadly effect, you can call this 1-800 number so that if you pass out, they can call the ambulance because they know what happened. Otherwise, nobody may know. And so things like this, Narcan being distributed, another example. These are controversial because some people feel like if we teach people how to use safer, aren't we giving them permission to use? I say no, but some people would say yes. It's probably why they're not used as much. So that is all. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.